Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Let's get started. Our top focus on Gravitas tonight. While US President Donald Trump is trying his best to weaponize the tariffs against India, we are decoding for you the messaging coming in from within the United States. That's coming up in just a bit. And here's a look at what else is lined up for you on the show tonight. We are focusing on the latest on the Russia-Ukraine war. A lot has happened in just the last 24 hours, with Ukraine struck by a massive Russian attack overnight. We also tell you all about a first-of-its-kind drill as Russian and Chinese submarines patrol together and the Royal Navy practices hunting them down. You don't want to miss this. All this and more coming up. US President Donald Trump is trying his best to weaponize the tariffs against India, but the messaging coming in from within the United States, from the White House, is appearing more and more contradictory and convoluted, devoid of logic as time passes by. So much so that politicians from within the Republican and the Democratic Party also are condemning Trump's tariff imposition on India. And while the move continues to draw condemnation from outside the United States as well, because to put it simply, free trade cannot just be on Trump's terms. It has to be on equal footing. Let's first tell you what US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had to say. Listen to this.
President Trump is trying to end this war in Ukraine that never would have started if he'd been president. And, our European allies need to step up. I don't see them threatening the tariffs on the Indians. And as a matter of fact, they're the ones buying the refined products that's made from the Russian oil.
Now, let's just focus on the last two lines there. Scott Bessent is clearly admitting that Europe is buying refined Russian oil products. But why is the United States then not imposing tariffs on Europe and naming them as a punishment for buying Russian oil? And if punishment for purchasing Russian oil is actually the problem, then the US bias and intentions are clearly suspicious at this point, a huge question mark, given that it is public knowledge that China is the biggest buyer and Turkey another major buyer of Russian oil. In fact, the US Treasury Secretary is, in a way, seemingly instigating Europe against India. Is it because the United States is scared about Russia, China, and India coming together as a formidable force? Some believe even trying to create a wedge between the three by adopting different yardsticks on the same tariff aspects. Because the statistics alone speak for themselves. New Delhi, Moscow, Beijing represent nearly 37% of the world's population, while BRICS alone represents more than 41% of the world's GDP as of last year. More than 41% of the world's GDP. And with Prime Minister Modi meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping and the Russian President Vladimir Putin during the upcoming SCO summit starting this weekend, the US appears to be clearly worried. In fact, the advisor to Donald Trump has blamed Prime Minister Modi and India for the Russia-Ukraine war, stating that Ukraine is, quote-unquote, Modi's war. In fact, it's baffling that for his boss, Donald Trump, it has been Biden's war ever since. Prime Minister Modi, remember, has maintained that this is not an era of war. The frustration is so evident with Navarro that he further called Indians arrogant. But here's a reality check on the trade between Russia and the United States. The trade between the two sides has grown by 20% since the Trump administration returned to power. 20%, a fact revealed by Russian President Vladimir Putin during his meeting with Donald Trump at the recent Alaska summit. And if Ukraine is Prime Minister Modi's war, as Navarro claims, then he seems to be clearly unaware of the global dynamics at play. After the Alaska summit and post the tariff imposition, world leaders from around the world, different parts, including Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, have called Prime Minister Modi, highlighting India's role, with Zelensky explicitly stating that Ukraine counts on India's contribution towards helping ending the war. Contribution towards helping to end the war. Similar to Scott Bessent's comments, Trump's top economic advisor warned that unless India does not stop Russian crude trade, the US and its president will not change the stance on the steep tariffs on Indian imports. Listen to this now.
One thing I think we've all learned is that you need to keep your eyes on the horizon and recognize that there are going to be ebbs and flows in things before we reach the final position. And if the Indians don't budge, I don't think President Trump will either.
Now, let's just take note of how the opposition, the Democrats, are reacting to the Trump administration's knee-jerk statements. In a statement, Democrats in the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee slammed Trump and his administration for imposing tariffs on India, stating that the tariffs on Indian imports are quote-unquote hurting Americans and sabotaging the U.S.-India ties. That's not even all. The tariffs against India being an issue within the Republican camp as well. With former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, last week stating that the U.S. should treat India as a prized free democratic partner. And global support for the tariffs on India has been coming in. In fact, the reactions have been coming in, including U.S. allies, analysts who understand the rising might of India as the largest democracy. With Australia's Trade Minister also becoming the latest one to condemn America's actions.
A country that believes in free and fair trade. We believe that the best way of ensuring prosperity for our workers and our country is to continue with free, fair and open trade. So we don't support the imposition of tariffs, whether they be on Australia or India. Protectionism is not the way to improve the prosperity of your populations. It's free and fair trade that will get you to that point.
And from all of this, one thing seems to be clear, that under pressure on India, the White House is clearly confused and contradictory. While the double standards by America are more than evident, it's the trust that is completely lost. For the United States, interests being primary, it seems, and the only guiding principle, while trust seems to be simply tertiary. Shifting focus for now, Ukraine was struck by a massive Russian attack overnight, one of the deadliest attacks on Kiev. In fact, it claimed the lives of 18 people, including 4 children. The president of Ukraine has said that the attack showed Russia's quote-unquote rejection of efforts being taken to stop the war. What does all of this mean for the peace talks, though? First, let's take a look at these visuals coming in from Ukraine. Rescuers raced to reach the victims after the Russian strikes pounded buildings in Kiev. Victims were carried away in body bags as rescuers sifted through the smoldering rubble. US President Donald Trump's special peace envoy Keith Kellogg called the attack egregious, warning that they threaten the peace that Trump is pursuing. And according to Ukraine, Russia unleashed 629 air attack weapons on Ukraine overnight, which consisted of over 500 drones, 31 missiles. The attack is being considered the second deadliest attack on Kiev since the war started. In fact, the Russian strike blasted a 5-story crater in one apartment block, ripping the building into two. Zelensky called the attack a horrific and deliberate killing of civilians. He also called for Russia to face fresh sanctions. Meanwhile, Russia said that it struck military-industrial complex enterprises and military air bases in Ukraine using high-precision weapons. But Russia has also rained down aerial attacks on Ukrainian cities, reportedly, despite US President Donald Trump's push for a ceasefire. On the same day that it struck Kiev, the Kremlin said that it was still interested in peace talks, but that its strikes on Ukraine would continue. Listen to this.
Свои задачи выполняют и российские вооруженные силы. Они, как было заявлено, продолжают бить по объектам военной и околовоенной инфраструктуры. Удары успешные, цели уничтожаются, специальная военная операция продолжается. Одновременно с этим Россия сохраняет свою заинтересованность в продолжении переговорного процесса с тем, чтобы именно политико-дипломатическими средствами достигнуть тех целей, которые перед нами стоят.
The EU summoned Russia's ambassador after the overnight barrage damaged its delegation offices in Kiev. EU officials posted photos of blown-out windows and the office ceiling partially collapsed.
It shows that the Kremlin will stop at nothing to terrorize Ukraine, blindly killing civilians, men, women and children, and even targeting the European Union. This is why we are keeping maximum pressure on Russia. That means tightening our sanctions regime.
The UK Foreign Secretary also summoned the Russian ambassador to the UK Foreign Office. The British Council's premises in Kiev severely damaged and would be closed until further notice. The British Prime Minister, meanwhile, accused the Russian president of sabotaging hopes of peace with the latest strikes. French President Emmanuel Macron condemning what he called Russian terror and barbarism, quote-unquote. The overnight attack on Kiev also comes following a summit between Putin and Trump, remember, in Alaska. The Kremlin has rebuffed initiatives for a swift end to the fighting, including pressure for a Zelensky-Putin meeting. Moscow is demanding Kiev cede more territory and renounce Western military support and ask conditions for any peace deal. But these demands from Moscow have been ruled out by Kiev. In fact, Ukraine has demanded security guarantees from its Western allies and has long cast Russia as only paying lip service to the idea of stopping the war. Meanwhile, a new Cold War seems to be brewing, not on land, but in the silent, crushing depths of our oceans. Western and Eastern powers are playing a rather dangerous game of cat and mouse beneath the waves. As Russian and Chinese submarines patrolled together in a first-of-its-kind drill in the Asia-Pacific, while the Royal Navy is practicing hunting them down. Take a look.
Silent, invisible, and deadly. A new battle is unfolding beneath the world's oceans in the North Atlantic. Britain is on high alert. Naval commanders fear a Russian submarine, dubbed the Real Red October, is prowling close to its shores. Sonar buoys dropped. Frigates deployed. RAF patrol planes sweeping the skies. Every ping, every shadow treated as a threat. The hunt is on. Across the globe, another chapter of this undersea chess match is playing out. For the first time, China and Russia have launched a joint submarine patrol in the Asia-Pacific. Two nuclear-armed navies operating side by side, signaling unity, defiance, and ambition to dominate the world's oceans. Western intelligence calls it a double provocation. Britain faces Moscow's stealth push into the Atlantic. The US and its allies confront a Beijing-Moscow axis patrolling contested waters in Asia. And unlike battles fought in the open air, this war is silent. Submarines move unseen, armed with torpedoes and nuclear missiles. One mistake, one miscalculation could ignite a clash with catastrophic consequences.
And before we go on any further, here's a quick look at what else is lined up for you on the show tonight. We are focusing on the situation in Gaza. Also, the question, why are Israel and the United States dismissing a UN-backed Gaza famine report? Why is this question being asked? We're getting you the bigger picture. What's the story behind Turkey's new steel dome integrated air defense system? What's it about? We're getting you all the details. All this and more coming up. Our next story is from Gaza. It is facing famine. That's well known. But what is shocking is that while the entire world can see it, also different parts are condemning it, calling it man-made disaster even, the United States seems to not. And here's why we're saying that. At the United Nations Security Council, 14 out of 15 members, all except the United States, declared the famine in Gaza a man-made crisis. In fact, they reminded that starvation as a weapon of war is banned under international humanitarian law. They demanded the famine in Gaza must be stopped immediately. And just to put things into context here, 514,000 people, that's nearly a quarter of Gaza's population, already suffering through famine. By September, that number could rise to 641,000. Nearly 1.5 million people facing crisis levels of food insecurity. At least 132,000 children are projected to suffer from acute malnutrition between now and June next year. These figures come from the UN-backed Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Report. It is the world's most trusted authority on famine. And in a joint statement, UNSC members cited the IPC's figure calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, release of all hostages, unrestricted aid into Gaza, and for Israel to lift all the blockades on humanitarian supplies. But Israel has dismissed the report as false and biased, claiming the IPC relied on partial data from Hamas and ignored the recent food deliveries. The US-backed Israel's position, its acting ambassador to the UN, in fact, questioned the credibility and integrity of the IPC report, saying it does not pass the test on either. Meanwhile, Gaza continues to burn. Have a look at these images. They are fresh from today itself, showing Israeli tanks and troops amassing near Gaza's border. As plumes of smoke rise in the distance, Israeli airstrikes pounded the eastern and northern outskirts of Gaza City. Israel says its forces have returned to Jabalia to dismantle more Hamas tunnels and expand the combat operations. It's part of Israel's larger plan, basically, to take full control of Gaza City, which Israel has described as Hamas's last bastion. Ceasefire talks, meanwhile, mediated by Egypt and Qatar, remain stalled. Even though Hamas has accepted the latest proposal, the group says Israel's renewed offensive proves it is not serious about peace. According to Gaza's Civil Defense Agency, Israeli strikes killed at least 38 people on Wednesday, 16 of them in Gaza City. And so, as the war drags on, Washington also is quietly planning for Gaza's future. On Wednesday, US President Donald Trump hosted a White House meeting on post-war Gaza. He was reportedly joined by former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. What was discussed? It's not clear, but earlier this year, Trump had stunned the world by suggesting that the US should take control of Gaza, clear out its inhabitants, and redevelop it as a seaside real estate. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, praised that idea, prompting global outrage. For now, what is clear is this: in its 2 years of war in Gaza, Israel's offensive has already claimed at least 62,895 Palestinian lives, most of them civilians. And without urgent action, the famine there will take even more lives. And Israel is also conducting operations in Syria, meanwhile. These are images released by the Israeli army. They say this is their 474th Brigade conducting nighttime operations in southern Syria. According to the Syrian state media, Israeli forces carried out an overnight airborne raid on a site just outside the capital, Damascus, a site that had already been bombed multiple times this week. According to reports, in fact, this would be the deepest Israeli ground operation inside Syria since the alliance seized power in Damascus last December. Earlier this week on Tuesday, Israeli jets struck a site near Kisveh, killing 6 Syrian soldiers, according to the Syrian state television. And this same site was bombed again on Wednesday night. According to news agency AFP, the target was a former Syrian military base in Tal Maneh. And after the second attack on Wednesday night, Syrian state media claimed Israeli troops were flown into the area to carry out a raid. Details are still unknown, but reports speak of intensive reconnaissance flights over the region. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights saying the site was being used to store weapons for Hezbollah. The Iran-backed Lebanese militia and a longtime ally of former President Bashar al-Assad. It also said that the Israeli raid was the first of its kind since Assad's overthrow in December. On Thursday, Israel's defense minister repeated that its forces operate in all combat zones, but offered no details as such. According to researchers, Israeli troops may have been trying to remove or dismantle exposed intelligence devices, preventing them from falling into Syrian hands. And Israel, for that matter, has carried out hundreds of strikes in Syria over the years, targeting Iranian units, Hezbollah and Syrian army positions. Since Assad's ouster, it has also taken control of much of the demilitarized zone along the armistice line and begun talks with the interim authorities in Damascus. But this latest raid, a combination of airstrikes and ground operations, is being seen as a significant escalation, a message that Israel is willing to operate not just from the air, but also from deep on the ground inside Syrian territory. Shifting focus for now, Beijing is rolling out its biggest show of military might in years. Xi Jinping's guest list is turning heads, from Putin to Kim Jong-un and even a mysterious Taiwanese figure. As the world watches on, China is signaling power, unity, and defiance on a global stage. The roar of engines, the thunder of marching boots, Beijing's wide boulevards are being transformed into a theater of power. Tanks roll past in perfect formation. Hypersonic missiles glisten under the sun. Fighter jets rehearse thunderclaps across the skies. Every move, every step, choreographed with clockwork precision. Along the parade route, red flags line the streets, while advanced, never-seen-before weaponry is moved into position, shrouded in secrecy. This is not just a parade. It is China's message to the world of strength, pride, and readiness. At the center of it is President Xi Jinping, flanked by allies who make the West uneasy. Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, and most intriguingly, a shadowy Taiwanese leader whose identity Beijing refuses to reveal. That single name has set off a storm of speculation. Who is it? And why now? For Xi, the optics are everything. Russia's president standing shoulder to shoulder with North Korea's ruler, both giving symbolic weight to Beijing's military spectacle. Their presence underscores an emerging axis of defiance against Washington and NATO, against the Western order. China calls it Victory Day, but the real victory may lie in the optics, a grand stage where Beijing claims leadership of a new power bloc. Bureau Report, WION World is One. On to Turkey now, which has unveiled one of its most ambitious military projects yet. The Turkish president officially introduced the country's new steel dome integrated air defense system, It's basically a homegrown shield designed to guard the skies against just about everything, from drones to ballistic missiles. In fact, Turkey has already handed over 47 vehicles worth $460 million to its armed forces, vehicles that reportedly form the backbone of the Steel Dome's first operational layer. They include radar units, missile batteries, electronic warfare platforms, and supporting systems that all work together under the Steel Dome network. The push for this indigenous shield reportedly stems from Turkey's growing security requirements. After the 2019 purchase of the Russian S-400 missile defense system led to its removal from the US-led F-35 program, the country was basically left with gaps in air defense. And according to reports, ongoing wars in Syria and Ukraine, coupled with the regional tensions, like the Israeli strikes against Iranian assets, only increased the urgency to build a fully domestic solution. And Turkish officials describe the Steel Dome as a system of systems which connects radars, sensors, interceptors, and command networks into a single system. Artificial intelligence then allows faster detection, tracking, engagement of the incoming threats. Just to break this down further for you, the shield is designed for multiple layers of defense. At the lower end, the short-range guns and missile systems basically target threats under 5 kilometers. While for the medium-range protection, platforms like the Hisar missiles extend the shield up to 20 kilometers. According to reports, the Steel Dome will link with Turkey's upcoming naval fleet, including destroyers and frigates equipped with indigenous vertical launch systems. The Steel Dome project brings together nearly every major weapons program Turkey has developed in recent years, from guided missiles to precision smart munitions. In comparison to Israel's Iron Dome, meanwhile, the Steel Dome does not offer long-range ballistic missile interception. Turkey is aiming to reportedly extend the Steel Dome's range to about 200 kilometers. But that is still far short of Israel's Arrow system, which engages threats at thousands of kilometers. A senior leader of Bangladesh Nationalist Party has claimed that efforts are being made to erase the memory of Bangladesh's 1971 liberation war from people's minds, saying that those who once aided the enemies are now raising their voices in public discourse. Speaking at an event in Dhaka, Mirza Fakhrul Islam Alamgir, the Secretary General of former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia's BNP, has said that it's not possible to forget the country's liberation war against Pakistan. He was apparently targeting fundamentalist Jamaat-e-Islami party, which had opposed the 1971 independence from Pakistan. He also warned that a form of extremism is on the rise in Bangladesh, which must not be allowed to grow, as it poses a threat to the country's spirit and existence. And during the Dhaka event, BNP's Alamgir raised concerns about the growing prevalence of corruption under the current interim government. He pointed out that corruption has become so widespread that it affects just about every aspect of public life. His comments came 2 days after the BNP suspended Zia's political advisor and 1971 veteran Fazlur Rahman's party membership for 3 months for breaching party policies and hurting people's religious sentiments. Rahman appeared as a key voice against the re-emergence of anti-liberation forces in the political arena during and after last year's movement, which toppled Sheikh Hasina and the Sheikh Hasina regime. In fact, in response to his suspension, Rahman said that he had never taken any action or made any statements that could be detrimental to his party and vowed never to do so in the future. He clarified that his criticism of Jamaat stemmed from his belief that they represented dark forces conspiring against both the July uprising and the liberation war. The BNP founder, meanwhile, played a defining role in 1971. On March 25, during Pakistan's crackdown, he revolted in Chittagong and soon after declared independence, giving direction to the freedom struggle. He later commanded Sector 1, Sector 11 and formed the famous Z Force, earning the gallantry title. With the elections approaching and the Awami League nearly absent from the political arena there, analysts and media reports suggesting that Khaleda Zia's BNP is emerging as the dominant force in the country. On to Mexico now. A Senate proceeding there descended into utter chaos with punches, shouting, even threats by leaders. What really led to it? A debate on whether the US military should intervene against Mexico's powerful drug cartels. Take a look. In what were threats so far, now a reality, European countries France, Britain and Germany initiated the process of reimposing UN-led sanctions on Iran over its much contested nuclear program. And what this essentially means is sweeping restrictions will now be reimposed on Iran's arms, missiles, nuclear technology under what can be called a snapback mechanism. And what this could also mean is that Iran could face the risk of being barred from key global trade and even face renewed economic isolation. Iran has called the reimposition of these sanctions, which were suspended almost a decade ago, unjustified and illegal, and vowed appropriate retaliation. Earlier, Iran had hit back, threatening to abandon all cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, if the sanctions were formalized. Now, what might seem like a recent development has actually been under consideration for months, something which is likely to strike a new low in Iran's ties with the West since Israel's attacks on the country's nuclear sites in the month of June, one which could lead to a bigger fallout with graver implications as far as nuclear diplomacy is concerned. For long now, the European powers, along with the United States, have blamed Iran for stockpiling near weapon-grade uranium and blocking the UN inspectors. On the other hand, Tehran has justified the move, citing Washington's abandonment of the 2015 nuclear deal, both sides accusing each other of violations and so-called hypocrisy, a resolution for which appears to be far-fetched unless Washington and Tehran negotiate a new agreement. On Wednesday itself, the IAEA chief said that he met with the Secretary of State of the United States to discuss the issue of Iran ahead of the sanctions deadline, and called Iran's cooperation on the matter so far a work in progress.
How we do this? Iran passed legislation requiring certain security concerns to be addressed. We want to know what these concerns are, how we can address them. So they have a new system, internal system, which is, for us, it is, we don't have an issue with that.
Hailing the snapback of European sanctions, Rubio has said that America is open to direct engagement with Iran. The question now is, how will Iran respond? We'll have to wait and watch. On to the United States now, a horror story that America unfortunately is far too familiar with. Another shooting left America stunned when a 23-year-old suspect opened fire. This was at a school. However, in America, this is a plot that has now repeated itself far too many times, with school shootings becoming a grim reality in the recent past, even triggering debates about gun ownership. However, the details of this particular shooting are as chilling as it gets. Authorities identified the attacker as a 23-year-old, Robin Westman, who died from self-inflicted injuries reportedly after the gun attack. And according to US media, Westman had attended the same school, and like any 20-something, the person's social media post suggests growing up on a rich diet of pop culture references, except there are deviations which are concerning, such as violent diary entries on mass killings reportedly in the past, and the chilling messages inscribed on weapons reportedly. The US shooter's video horror starts when one of the videos running approximately 11 minutes begins with an image instantly recognizable to television audiences, a black and white sketch of Heisenberg, the alter ego of Walter White from popular TV series Breaking Bad. The camera then pans slowly towards what appears to be a handwritten suicide letter. The framing lingers on the page long enough for viewers to read the words of apology directed at his family. And as the video continues, the focus then shifts from the letter to the weapons. Rifle magazines are seen laid on a table with texts written on them. The suspect showing pistol bullets, cartridges reading "for the children" and other spine-chilling phrases. The suspect appeared to be proficient in the Cyrillic script and kept a handwritten manifesto using the Russian alphabet. The pictures of the weapons were also shared by American far-right activist and Trump ally Laura Loomer reportedly, who suggested that the assailant was influenced by anti-Jewish and anti-Indian propaganda, quote-unquote. Other phrases included anti-black and irreligious sentiments, including the phrase, quote-unquote, "Where is your God?" Robert Westman, born in 2002, the suspect filed to legally change name to Robin Westman at the age of 17, in fact. The petition stated that the teenager identified as female. The request was approved by a court in the year 2020. According to reports, the suspect's mother previously worked at a Catholic school as a secretary, retiring in 2021 after 5 years at the institution. This is the same school where the shooting took place reportedly. And according to the investigators, Westman carried 3 weapons to the shooting site.
The shooter was armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol. This was a deliberate act of violence against innocent children and other people worshiping. The sheer cruelty and cowardice of firing into a church full of children is absolutely incomprehensible.
The mass shooting is the latest in a long list of deadly school attacks in the United States, where attempts to restrict easy access to firearms face political deadlock. The attack drew condemnation and expressions of grief from across the United States. President Donald Trump, who directed US flags at the White House be lowered to half-staff. And while we are tracking the latest from the United States, another issue is worth mentioning, that of racism, rooted in discrimination and divide as much in present as in the past. Back in May, US President Donald Trump, remember, offered refugee status to the minority white Afrikaner community in South Africa. Trump's administration claimed that this community were victims of discrimination and quote-unquote genocide, a claim that was rejected by the government of Pretoria. At a press briefing, meanwhile, the South African foreign minister called out the US refugee program for its preferential treatment of Afrikaners in South Africa to enter the United States. He went a step further to call it apartheid 2.0. Listen in.
You know, with our history of our country, a preferential treatment of a particular privileged group, the Afrikaners, who are not running away from any genocide in this country, is definitely apartheid 2.0.
And now, after taking office in January, Trump essentially halted refugee arrivals in the US. However, he made an exception for the Afrikaners. And this is despite Pretoria saying that they do not face persecution. In fact, quite ironically, Afrikaner-led governments legalized the race-based apartheid system that denied South Africa's black majority political and economic rights until 1994, when it was voted out. Now, in May, a group of around 50 Afrikaners were flown to America on a chartered plane, and since then, smaller groups have followed suit. And now the US is reportedly applying for visas for around 30 people from an NGO based in Kenya to come to South Africa to fast-track the processing of African applications for US resettlement. Just for context here, who are the Afrikaners? They are a unique cultural group basically descending from mixed-race European settlers in South Africa. By profession, they are mostly farmers, and history has it, they settled in South Africa. They forced black people to leave their land, reportedly. And relations between America and South Africa have nosedived since Trump 2.0, and the signs were evident. In March, Pretoria's ambassador was expelled. Later, Trump imposed a 30% tariff on exports from South Africa, remember, which has been negotiating for a reduction to avoid potential job losses. If that was not all, remember in May, Trump ambushed South African counterpart Cyril Ramaphosa with his claims of white genocide, quote unquote, being committed against white farmers in South Africa. Claims which a judge termed baseless and even imaginary. However, for South Africa, what's even more pressing than tariffs is the sheer discrimination and white privilege that the community is confronted with. Even as South African laws seek to promote black-owned businesses and farmlands, they can only go so far, which then raises serious questions on the human rights situation of the native South African community, both in the region and across the world. Indonesia is planning one of the world's biggest seawalls, an $80 billion project stretching 700 kilometers across Java. The goal is to protect the sinking coastlines and the communities swallowed by rising seas due to climate change. But while the villagers see it as a lifeline, climate experts are warning it could make the crisis worse. On to Germany now, where the country's beer culture is facing a big shake-up, and the reasons are not the breweries as such, but the young Germans who are simply not drinking. For decades, beer has reportedly been identified as Germany's pride identity. But today, Gen Z, walking away from alcohol, is leaving behind a lot of intrigue, leaving German breweries as well struggling to survive in a way. Sales had been shrinking gradually, just 2 to 3% a year. But now this decline has turned into a free fall. In just the first half of this year alone, beer sales reportedly dropped more than 6% as compared to last year, marking the lowest 6-month consumption in Germany since 1993. And the numbers tell the story. According to Germany's Federal Institute of Public Health, only 38% of German men under 25 drink weekly, as compared to more than half a generation ago, and a staggering 85% in the 1970s. Among women under 25, the drop is even sharper. Just 18% drink weekly, down from over 54% half a century back, just for context. Now today, only a quarter of Gen Z Germans reportedly reach for beer regularly. And this is not just limited to Germany or beer for that matter. It's a global issue in a way. In France, for example, red wine sales reportedly collapsed by nearly 90% over the past 50 years, with Gen Z drinking barely half of what millennials once did. Why is this happening though? According to experts, young people are choosing health over hangovers. Gym memberships, wellness routines, mental health awareness now competing directly with the bar culture that once, in a way, defined youth. And while price also plays a major factor, according to experts, alcohol for many Gen Z people feels like an unnecessary luxury in a way, especially when wallets are tight and breweries are scrambling to adapt to this. Many, in fact, are turning to alcohol-free or low-alcohol options, hoping to win back this health-conscious generation. But the problem seems to be bigger than just product variety as such. Data from the US showing that drinking rates among young people started falling more than 2 decades ago. So in a world where wellness matters more than ever, it seems more and more that alcohol is losing its place at the table. In Kabul, dozens of Afghan retirees gathered outside the pension department as the long-awaited payout resumed this week. Nearly 150,000 former civil servants and military personnel are set to receive pensions gradually. But for many, the small payments offer only a brief respite from the daily struggles. The news of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's engagement continuing to take the internet by storm. For Swifties, Taylor Swift's fans as they are called, one big question lingers on. What does marriage mean for Taylor Swift's music? And American singer found her lover and NFL star Travis Kelce, remember, after 11 music albums based on love, heartbreak and shattered dreams. Summer does not look that cruel for Swift anymore, it seems. The 35-year-old pop star's greatest strength as a songwriter has always been her ability to turn her own life into music by blending intimate details into the universal themes of love, loss, hope, betrayal. From the start, her love life has been central to her lyrics. She has put out songs about emotionally unavailable men, falling for the wrong guy, even rebound romances. Thinking of tracks like All Too Well, I Knew You Were Trouble, Getaway Car. She's also been in on the joke, in fact. In her hit track Shake It Off, she poked fun at the endless chatter about her relationships. In the song Blank Space, she went further, turning every rumor about her love life into a biting satire. And now some are wondering, does Happily Ever After make for less compelling music? Rock history suggests otherwise. Plenty of artists, especially women, have turned domestic life into powerful inspiration. And the love story hitmaker has already shown that she can write from a place of joy, of course. Songs like Delicate and Lover are among her most loved and most celebrated tracks. Marriage could mark the start of an entirely new chapter in Swift's career. One thing is for sure, fans of the American singer worldwide will be there for every verse. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas tonight. This is me, Molly Gambhir, signing off. Thanks for watching.
To bring the benefits of the Subhash Chandra Show to your educational institution, teachers and students, send an invitation to Juhi Jha at juhi@such.org.in. All eyes on China's Tianjin, a high-stakes convergence of the world's most influential leaders at the SCO summit. As Trump's tariffs rattle markets and the Russia-Ukraine war deepens, key meetings take center stage. Prime Minister Modi to meet Presidents Xi and Putin. Critical exchanges that could shift the balance of the global order. Watch continuous coverage only on WION World is One.
Dive right into the spirit of Ganesh Chaturthi with films and songs that capture the essence of the Indian festival. Take a look at the fashion evolution of the West and know all about the role of costumes in period dramas.